Good morning YouTube and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be talking about my BMW E46 M3 and my BMW E92 M3. Many over the years who have followed the channel have always asked me which do I prefer and why. And the answer to that question is So to set the background quickly, I bought the E46 M3 around 5 or 6 years ago. Relatively standard car from a good friend Matt. He bought it, had it for a couple of months. I said to him, if it checks out, I'll take it off his hands. I'd always wanted one, always loved them. And ever since I'd seen a CSL, I always wanted one of those. Now in hindsight, I probably should have just bought the CSL and tucked it away and it would have been worth a lot more money. But back at that time, it was easier for me to buy a normal E46 M3, do all the modifications to try and make it look as close to a CSL, and then obviously have the finished item that we've got here that looks the part. The E92 M3 was slightly different, however. I'd got to a point where I no longer did big miles, was doing around 6 miles a day commuting, and I really fancied the V8 itch. Now the funny thing is, when I was looking at E92 M3s, I was never originally sold on the look of them. It was one of those things I thought, yeah, the engine's cool, revs really high, sounds fantastic, but never completely sold on the looks, and that has changed a lot. So the party piece for the E92 M3, the 4-litre V8 petrol engine, the codename S65. At standard, revs to just over 8,200 RPM, makes a sensational noise, but in standard form, a very quiet car, obviously with the emission side of things. Now with a few upgrades, like you can see here, I've got the full Karbonius carbon intake. I mean, if you've seen any of my other videos, which I'll link at the end, just an absolutely incredible noise, and obviously all works like factory. So no map required, no aftermarket ECU control. It works completely stock and just provides you with some superb soundtrack. Now, as we mentioned, in the engine bay side of things, there are upgrades that you can do to obviously improve the intake noise. Now, I've also gone with the standard back box and the pre-cat delete. For those that saw the tuning video, which again I'll link at the end, I did have the pre-cats deleted, which means it will still pass an MOT, gives you a nice power increase, and it wakes up the sound of the engine. Now the other option that's really good with the E92 M3 is you don't have to spend a lot of money on an exhaust system. You can simply open up the standard back box and modify that. And there's a company in the UK called Modstock which do that for you. They drop the silencer, cut open the inside, cover up the sections, and you can choose how loud you want it to be. And honestly, it completely transforms the exhaust noise of the car. So my car that I've got here is a competition model, which in the UK provides you with the lovely M359 competition alloy wheels, which can also be found on the GTS models. The beauty of this is obviously it sets it aside from a standard car, but CM wheels do a replica variant if you want that look as well. Along with it being a competition model, you get the revised damper settings and revised EDC control. So it really does wake the car up for road performance. Now on this car, as you've probably seen, it's a little bit lower than factory. I've gone with a KW has kit. Again, I've got a full video on fitting all that on the channel if you want to check it out. So inside the car, I haven't done a great deal. I've painted everything in a gloss piano black look. I've gone with an Alcantara steering wheel with the centre band stripe, and the biggest upgrade that I've done for the car over standard is the M4 seats. Now again, I've done a video on this. It is pretty much a plug and play. I have done custom seat rails. I'm 6'2". This just ensures that I'm sat nicely in the car, and I must say the cabin of the E92 M3, especially with the Harman Kardon system, is a wonderful place to be for daily driving. So as I said, we've got the M4 seats in here, which really add to the interior of the E92 M3. For those that have seen the standard seats, they're nothing special, not particularly supportive, and I don't think they look great in all honesty. So at least with this, I've still got all the factory heating, factory adjustment, and all the memory seats. And while we're in the inside, let's have a quick discussion about the DCT gearbox in the E92 M3. So it's a twin clutch setup, incredibly fast when you want it to be, but also wonderfully smooth when you're just commuting daily, which we're going to do a comparison on the road between the SMG and the E46 M3 shortly. So the E46 M3, as I mentioned in the intro, the car I'd wanted for years. I built the CSL replica. To go through everything that I've done to this car now would be monstrous, and what I'll do in the description is I'll put a link to the project thread, so if you want to see everything on the car you can do. But essentially it's a 2003 car, LCI, so it comes with the facelift lights, and everything you see here bar the wheels I have changed to make it look like the CSL replica that it is today. In the E46 M3, you have the 3.2 litre straight six engine. For me, the intake noise is what it's all about. Now, I've currently got a Jeff Steele Racing Airbox on here, which it's been okay. It's done the job, and which later on will be replaced for a Karbonius unit because they just look and are built so much better. I've had some niggly issues with it, but overall it still makes that fantastic noise. Now, in the E46 M3, as I mentioned, you've got the 3.2 litre straight six engine, which is the model code, the S54. Now, what I will say compared to the E92 and the E46 is there's a lot more urgency with the S54 engine. It feels like it's more torque hungry, whereas the E92 requires a bit more revs to really get it out the best of it. But that is part of the fun and obviously what I enjoy out of a naturally aspirated car. But in terms of daily driving, a very easy engine to live with, but we will talk about the gearbox in a second. On the interior of the E46, for me, it's still a wonderfully special place to be. Compared to the E92, it feels a lot more tighter and compact, and that has a good thing and a bad side to it as well, because for daily driving, I love the spacious cabin in the E92, but when you're in the mood for a spirited drive and you're tucked into this, especially with the Recaro CS seats I've got in here, it makes such a fantastic driving experience. And in this car, very, 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 very big topic that's always discussed is the SMG gearbox. Now, for me, when you're flat out on a back road blast, the SMG gearbox is wonderful. And I agree with what people say. Around town, even with the CSL calibration, it can be a bit temperamental, and that's not to say it's bad. Obviously, it's like a first generation of single clutch gearboxes for BMW, and when you're on point with it, it is really fast, but you do have to learn to drive around it. And now, as you can also see from the interior, I've gone with the CSL style Alcantara steering wheel, I've gone with the CSL style gator, which is like a small gator in Alcantara, and the handbrake gator in Alcantara as well. So I think it really finishes the package off, especially compared to the standard SMG shifter. Now, as you may have seen in the E92, I am a fan of little black knobs. I do find them nice and easy to use, especially when you're out driving rather than big bulky shifters. So really happy with how the interior has come along on this car. And like I said, got the interior trims painted in the piano black, and it's just got a basic Android head unit, which just gives you that Bluetooth connectivity to bring it up to today's standards. Something that I've always kept completely stock on the E46 and never had any plans to change is the exhaust system. As you'll probably hear in the intro bit where we've done the sound clips, they're very raspy, and I've always found that whenever you put an aftermarket system on there, it really amplifies that, and it's not a noise I like. So for me, it's all about that CSL intake sound, and the exhaust is completely standard, right down to the tips, the back box, the catalyst, completely OEM. to the actual driving experiences of the car. So we'll go in the E46 M3 and I'll move between the E92 whilst we're getting everything up to temperature, which we'll discuss in the engine video, which these cars are very sensitive to. So in the cabin of the E46, as I mentioned in the intro, it's a much more confined space, and that's not a bad thing. It just feels very tight. You feel like you could reach the passenger door, whereas the E92 does feel a lot bigger for that. So straight away greeted with the lovely Alcantara steering wheel, which is not standard. They come in a leather standard, which is still a nice steering wheel. But what I will say between the E46 and the E92 is the E92 has a thick chunky wheel, whereas the E46 is quite thin in comparison. Both are a brilliant size to drive with. In my little Clio Cup, I've got a 330mm steering wheel, which is really nice and nimble, but I think this size steering wheel really suits the M car. And you do see people who change them, but generally the size between the two from feel feels exactly the same. The clocks. Well, the clocks for me, I've always loved the E46 ones, and they've moved back to them in the later F80 series. It's got this sort of grey background to it. It looks really nice. It's got an old school sort of LED light, which as the engine gets up to temperature, it increases. And then when it is up to temperature, they actually serve as a shift light. And I really like the E46 cluster a lot, and I've grown a lot for the E92. But what I will say about the E46, which I like more than the E92, is you have a water temperature gauge. For some reason in the E92 they got rid of that, which is, I don't know, like oil obviously is the most important temperature, that's what you're waiting to see, but it's nice to keep an eye on the water level as well. Now if you do own an E92, you do have the hidden menu, and what the hidden menu is, you can press a load of buttons on the end of the stalk. It'll bring up the coolant temperature digitally, but unfortunately it does reset every time you turn the clock off. So it's just something to bear in mind that on the E46 you get the oil and the water, which I prefer. And I think if it came to push for shove, I'd probably have the E46 clocks over the E92, but the E92 set does look a lot more modern. As mentioned, as we're letting everything warm up on both cars, which is really important on any vehicle before you start abusing it, but especially on the M cars. They run a 10 weight 60 oil on the E46 and E90 generation, which is thick oil. They're notoriously known for doing bottom end shells, so it's always worth making sure the oil's at least at 80-85 degrees before anything. Normally I wait till it gets up to about 90, which is just before the 100 mark, waiting for any spirited driving, so to speak. So E92 M3 inside the cabin. Do you know what? It loses that little tight special feel to it, but it feels like much more plush pace to be. Everything feels, I don't know, it's hard to explain unless you're actually sat in it, but it feels like you're in a more premium car. It definitely feels like the build quality for BMW came a big step forward over the E46 for me. Now I'm not saying the E46 is a bad interior, but like I say, it's a really nice cabin to be in. It's also a lot more sound insulated, so that's good if, like now I'm talking to you guys, we're driving down the road. But where the problem is with that is when you start doing modifications to the car, exhaust, intake, you sit in it and you think, that isn't actually that loud, and then when you hear it from the outside you're like, okay, that's really loud, borderline antisocial. I used to have the 2-pipe modification on my back box, which I got rid of because I wanted more intake noise, and that was loud. I do miss aspects of it, but you couldn't really hear it still in the car. But from the outside you would see, especially if you've downshifted, you'd go through a tunnel and you'd look behind you and you'd see people, oh, what on earth was that? So yes, the cabin does lose a bit of sensation, and that's, like I say, a good and a bad thing, because you don't no longer have the rattles and the road and the stone chip noises coming up in the arches, but you also lose a bit of the sensation from speed. You've also got, as I mentioned, the thicker steering wheel in here. I mean, it's really nice to drive with. I don't know, like, do I prefer the thinner steering wheel? Maybe when I'm on it, but then there are times when I really like the thick chunky wheel. And for me, again, I'm not fussed by either. The size is good on both. I'm not bothered about changing it, but they do feel both really wonderful to drive with. Seats, as mentioned, these aren't the factory one, these are the Recaro CS. These are actually from a Lotus Evora, so they've got no Lotus markings. They're in black leather, which means they look great in the interior, and they're super comfy and supportive. I've gone across Europe for those that follow the channel. Again, I'll put the link in the playlist at the end, and I can do hours in these seats with absolutely no complaints. Now, the standard seats for me, not a bad seat. I just didn't find they were particularly supportive, and I couldn't get low enough, which is always something I really struggle with my height. And for me, now with the CS seats in here, it really transforms the interior. But other than that, and a bit of paint and the change to the gear knob, as we mentioned, it's a pretty standard car inside. Now this is where you find out why I've swayed so much to the E92 M3. In here, and again I can't do it because of, you're never going to pick it up on the camera, but the E46 and the E92 have both got the Harman Kardon sound system in them. The E92 is such a leap forward compared to the E46 in terms of rich quality from the speaker system, and obviously because it's so well insulated in the cabin, you can put some banging tunes on and really just enjoy it, especially with that V8 soundtrack. So for me, my sort of driving style's changed a lot now over the years. 5 years ago, I used to go up on a Sunday morning, we used to go over to the Cotswolds, we used to do dedicated big drives. The problem now is a lot of my friends are settling down. It's not what it once was with people where we'd have hours on end to go out driving. And you've also got to bear in mind that I think the roads have changed a lot. I've said this before, that you've got to be careful what you do now. You're being watched by everything, and I'm not saying you go out to break law, but dash cams everywhere. And I just find that if I'm going out in the E46, I only want to go for a drive. If I go out in the E92, I can go for a drive, I can go out with my partner, go out for dinner, lunch, whatever, but then a flick of a switch, which we'll discuss on the end button, it's just a Jekyll and Hyde car. It allows you to just enjoy it, but then flick the switch again and it's just completely back to just a normal 3 Series with a wonderful sounding motor in it. Next up, the handling. Well, this car has had some money spent on that, and again, I think it'd be too much to go through it, but everything has really been replaced that needed to be replaced. It's got Öhlins road and track coilovers, which are dual sensitive temperature valve controlled. Personally, a bit overkill for what I use the car for, but I mean, like now on a normal morning, we can flow through some roads and the car just feels absolutely planted. Maybe a little bit too firm for road use, even on the softest settings, but the way the E46 turns is wonderful. I love how nimble it feels, and I've had this car on the scales without driver, it's about 1500 kilos. Obviously I've still got all the rear interior, this is a sunroof model, but it does feel a lot lighter than the E92. It feels like you can really hustle this down the back roads, whereas the E92 feels a much bigger car on the road, which, I mean, I've not put the E92 on the scales, and from what I found out from this is the book figures, I would like to get the E92 weight to see what it actually comes in, but it feels much heavier than this. Maybe to do with the size, maybe like say because of the bigger road presence, the bigger cabin, but the E46 does feel like a little go-kart in comparison. Handling on the same bit of road, I mean, it's a good car on the road. What I'll say about the E92 M3 compared to the E46 is it makes more sense with speed. I don't know whether anyone else finds that. Let me know in the comments if you've driven both. The E46 is very darty, on point, whereas the E92, for me, it doesn't feel like it enjoys big changes in direction, but when it's flowing on a nice road, it really is sensational, and it fills you with plenty of confidence. Now, I'm running the KW Has kit on the standard competition dampers, because for me, it allowed me to keep all the electronic damper function whilst adjusting the height. And I must say, I've run the Airbox on it previously. It rides really well, it looks fantastic. I've got no desire to go coilovers on it because it is mainly a road car for me. I can't see me taking it on track because I haven't done all the other bits like the brakes. So I don't know, yeah, for me the KW Has kit is as far as I want to go at this time. Who knows what will change, because I am going to put a half cage in the back just to give it that club sport feel in the interior. Now the seats in this, I've got, as we mentioned, the M4 seats, which in theory are a straight bolt in. They do require a little bit tinkering with the loom, but they do bolt up straight away with the floor pan, which is brilliant, and they provide a much better hold. They look incredible, and I must say, for me, I think they're more comfortable than the CS seats because you can get the tilt, you've still got all the electric function on the base, but in terms of actual hold, even with the electronic bolsters, the CS seat is a better overall one. The engine comparison. So in the E46 M3, we've got the 3.2 litre straight six. Mine went on a Dyno Dynamics rolling road at Surrey rolling road, and the car did 330 horsepower at the calculated flywheel, which I think is about 17% on top of the wheel figure, roughly. So both cars have been on the dyno, which we'll discuss the E92 shortly. But this car, like I say, made relatively good power. What I will say between the two cars is they both have their issues. One of the things that really hurts the E46 E46 is the head gasket. You don't have to be particularly harsh with it, but they seem to fail between cylinders 5 and 6, which is backed by the bulkhead. Some say because of the heat, some say track cars, some say that do a lot of round town driving, hot on and off, stop start, aircon on, etc. But who really knows? The problem is they all seem to fail, and the reason for it is there's not a lot of spacing between the cylinders. Now that job at the time, I mean, from looking online, it's anywhere from sort of 1,000 to 1,500 quid just for the head gasket. Then there's issues with the Vanos, they suffer with the shells, but not a bigger issue as the E92. But there are things to factor in that you could easily buy one of these cars, think it's in good order, and then all of a sudden be stung with a £3,000 bill, which we've discussed in the full recap video of the E46 if you'd like to see that. The S54 engine is a masterpiece, winning numerous awards when it was first released for a category that provided such good power, such usable power, and still love to rev. And even today when I drive this car, especially compared to more modern stuff, it still manages to put a smile on my face. It just delivers such feel-good factor, plenty of go right down the bottom of the rev range, which continues to howl all the way to the top. Now obviously, as you've seen, I've got the CSL intake on this, which, I mean, the videos I don't think ever does it justice, how good it is. So in second gear now, let's wind it open. What a sound. Should have turned the traction control off there, had a little whoopsie, but I didn't expect to get any issues this morning. What I will say while we're talking about that, and hopefully, like I say, it comes across understandably in the video, for me in this car, not because I'm sort of a driving god, but I normally always turn the traction control off because it interferes so early, whereas in the E92 you have the MDM, which allows for a nice bit of slip, which for road use I think is perfect. So now I say we're on a nice national bit of road. I'll go down to 4th, 3,000 RPM, roll on the power. Oh, that intake noise, and it just goes straight from that RPM, building, 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 building. What a sound. And there are times when I drive this car, and even now, after 6 odd years, I get back in it and I think, what a bit of kit. So whilst we're stuck what appears to be Surrey's Tour de France today, obviously on a bank holiday Monday morning, they're always out unfortunately now, ruining any fun I have of driving around our local roads, we'll talk about the engine. Now, as I mentioned, it's a 4-litre V8, which for a 3 Series, when you really think about it, is mental. Now, the engine is actually, according to Wikipedia, 15 kilos lighter than the S54, the straight 6. So it's got 2 more pistons, rods, etc. And it's actually lighter. And you think, well, how on earth is that possible? Well, the answer to that is, in the E46, it runs a cast iron bottom end, whereas in the V8, it's all alley, so it's managed to save the weight. In standard form, the engine revs slightly higher than the E46. The E46 at the factory, I think, is 8,000 RPM, and on this, it looks like it's just over 8,200 before you feel that first soft cut limiter come in. Now, on both cars, I've had the ECU calibration change. This has been custom done. It goes just to 8,600 RPM, so almost 9,000 RPM, and it sounds incredible screaming all the way there. So the E46 is running a CSL cloned ECU, and that goes to 8,200. It hasn't been custom mapped to the modifications I got on the car. This did 421 horsepower on Surrey Rolling Road, like I say, versus the E46's 330. But what I will say, and as you may have seen in the clips, the additional weight and the fact that the E46 M3's got a shorter final drive, where we had the diff change from the one Matt had from the Z4M, up to 100 kilometers an hour. There's not a lot in it, to be honest with you. A lot of it is getting it off the line. And what I will say, from a standing start, the E92 is faster. The DCT gearbox just puts it down. But if you're rolling at 10, 15 mile an hour, there ain't a great deal in it, especially for back road driving. And also with the E46, you've got that advantage of it being a smaller chassis. It's more forgiving in the tighter roads, whereas the E92 does feel like a big car. Now, in terms of reliability on the engines, both have their issues. They're now obviously not new cars anymore. I think the E46 has more unknown, scary builds, if I'm completely honest. So in the E92, I've discussed this in other videos, you've got the bottom end shells that are pretty notorious for failing, 60 weight oil, people abusing them from cold, not letting the engine get up to temperature. The throttle actuators go, mine didn't fail, but I changed them as a preventative reason. Jason at rebuild.org does £450, or it might have been 470. You send off your actuators, he sends them back, all uprated, lifetime warranty of them, never going to have any issues. And the throttle actuators essentially are when you touch the accelerator pedal, they open the throttle bodies on the engine, and when they fail, they put it into limp mode, turns into a nightmare. Big one I think at the moment for the E92 is the fuel injectors. They've become a lot like the issue that suffered for the V10 in the M5 and M6. Is they stick open, they hydrolock the block, absolutely game over for the bottom end really. So they're about £300 now. It seems like they've gone up slightly to replace them. You don't need to go with anything fancy aftermarket, a standard set will do. They don't need any sort of coding. For the peace of mind, I would just change them, because if it fails, realistically now, 6 to 10 grand plus for a replacement engine versus 300 quid, a lot like the shells, you'd be mad not to change them. I've done a full guide on fitting it. It's not a particularly difficult job, and then you've just got full peace of mind that you've got years of trouble-free driving with the car. And for me, they're the three big issues. I think the E46, especially as it has issues with the boot floor tearing itself apart, the Vanos, the shells go on those, the head gasket. And like mine, if you've got the SMG, you've got that where the pumps can fail. Yes, there are all uprated units available, but the problem is, if like me, you're on a Euro trip and one of those items fail, you're stuck. Whereas I think for the E92, with the same sort of preventative maintenance done, they're a more reliable engine. What I will say with regards to the sounds with both cars is the E46 has a more old school touring car noise to it. It's very like hard edged. It sounds louder than the E92, but the E92 M3 with a carbon airbox has more of a supercar exotic noise to it. It's really felt through the dash and from the outside, because I've heard both from the outside. The E46 is louder, but I do prefer the sound of the V8. It's really won me over, really has. So as we mentioned in the intro, the SMG gearbox, for many, ruined the car, but I think as time has gone on, especially the last couple of years, the SMG's become very favourable for many, because it's a signature of the CSL and the E46 M3. It's BMW's first stab, to my knowledge, at a production single clutch automated gearbox. And essentially what that means is it can easily be converted to manual, and when I say easily, it's doable within realms that doesn't cost hundreds of thousands to redesign the car. You've basically got a manual gearbox in there. I believe there's something to do with the bell housing that needs to be changed. Those that follow the channel, Tom at Spartan Automotive does do the conversions. He was showing me when we were down there that it's easily doable. But for me, I do like the SMG, and as I've said today when we're driving around in traffic, yes, it can be a little bit tedious. You almost have to think about it. For example, if you were coming up to a junction and you're in second gear and you saw that you're going to be potentially moving pretty quickly, if you go for first and then you're like, oh, the traffic's moving, go for second, it just sort of, I don't know, it kangaroos, thinks about it, but you just know in these situations, especially after driving the car for a couple of days, that you've got to forgive, unfortunately, that the technology wasn't amazing back then. And when it is working, and I say down here, we've got a shift button mode, and basically you can turn the car, like now I've got it in S3, It goes all the way up to S6 with the traction control off, and what that means is how aggressively it shifts, and it's a mixture of how you've got your foot on the accelerator and what setting that's in. So you can have it in 6th on that setting, but if you're literally just off idle on the throttle pedal, it's still relatively smooth. But if you've got it in 6th and your foot's to the floor and you hit that gear shift paddle, it is going to punch to the point, for many who have been in this car say to me, that doesn't sound right, I think it's braking the car. And it does feel like a humongous thud through the backside. But I love it. I love how brute it is and the way it really adds to the whole experience of the car. And that for me, especially as it's working, I can't justify changing it to a manual, because although you'd get that driver engagement, the BMW manuals aren't great anyway, but you can fit what's like a CAE shifter, maybe improve it that way. I don't know, maybe I need to drive a properly sorted manual. But for me, the SMG is the E46 M3. I really do think it adds a lot of character to it. The way these cars are going now, with how they're becoming so collectible in the age, you don't daily drive them anymore. I rarely ever see an E46 M3 on the road. When they came out, yeah, I've got to admit, it was probably a bad decision for a lot of people who installed the normal SMG setup. And if you haven't done it, basically the CSL SMG software, which is like an update which can be applied to this car, makes everything shift so much more smoothly that without that, it is crap. It is proper crap. But with that software update, it really does make it a usable car to drive. And like I say, it was night and day difference when I had mine calibrated many, many years ago. It was one of the first things I did, and it really changes it for the good. The gearbox, the dual clutch transmission, the DCT. Well, on this car, I've had the GTS software installed, which gives it quicker shifts up and down the box, gives it rev matching. It is incredible. I guess it's as close as you're going to get to a proper sequential gearbox without the running costs and all the maintenance that would go with a genuine sequential. It shifts hard, it's also very compliant, it suits the V8 really well, it's lightning fast. I mean, now we're in 6th gear at 28 mile an hour. It will go into 7th, so if I click the MDM button, which we'll discuss in a minute, and then we're just effortlessly fast. Like, it really takes off, and it makes such a sound as it shifts, especially with that carbon airbox. Even now, 3 and a bit years later, oh, I love it. I genuinely love it. The DCT gearbox also comes with the adjustable shifting, and unlike the E46, it's not as aggressive. It's definitely a lot more forgiving, a lot more compliant for road use. It doesn't upset the car. You can again go up to like shift mode 6 in this with the traction control turned off, and to be honest with you, you get a little chirp between the wheels, between shifts, but you don't feel it like you do in the E46. It doesn't punch through, it just feels like a really nice, swift, seamless shift. You really, I guess, want somewhere between the SMG and the DCT for it to be a pure weekend toy, because maybe the DCT is a little bit too smooth. Not that I'm complaining, I think it's wonderful, but the SMG may be a little bit too harsh, especially compared to like the sequential gearboxes I have on the motorbikes. But I think it's a really nice feature that you can obviously adjust the shift pattern. Like now I'm in S2 auto, we're in a 40 section, I'm doing 35 mile an hour, and we're in 7th gear. It's literally tickling at 1100 RPM. Crazy how efficient it is just driving around. And then as soon as you hit that M button on the steering wheel, you can have your preset faster shifting, your hard and damping, your extreme throttle response, and it, like I say, it just changes into a different car. You hit the switch again and everything softens back off. So we've got traction off, 2nd gear, S shift, 6. God, the punch through the box. Brilliant. What a car, what a car. Now, for those that were watching, you could probably see that through the bend there, I wasn't going to shift with S6 at my throttle, and I not let off, but hummed it through and shifts, and it's a lot more delicate. But that first shift from 2nd to 3rd is just brutal. It jolts the whole rear of the car. Everything's new in here, poly bushes, etc. So 1st gear roll on. God, that noise. That's in MDM mode now, so it's holding the gear, 4th gear, blip down, What a sound. Hopefully it's picking it up on the microphone. And then you can just, and then when you've had enough, press the red button on the steering wheel and we're back to 6th gear, just cruising around. Really nice, just goes back to a completely normal car. The brakes, well, M cars, unfortunately, up until the F generation series, so about 2015 I think they came out, the brakes were pretty poor. So you've got single piston calipers on the front, cast on the E46, they are rally on the E92, so a little bit better, a little bit lighter, but still minimal brake feel really. Fade pretty quickly. I've managed to warp the E46 standard one, so I ended up upgrading in this. So on this car I've gone with the K-Sport kit. It's full 8-pot on the front, Paget RS29 pads, and it is night and day difference. Even from the moment you start applying pressure on the pedal, instant feedback, and they are monstrous. I've been around the ring, I've been to Europe in them, I've done Anglesey track day, had no fade, absolutely zero issues at all. Whereas the standard brakes, especially on the E46, for something that's an M car, I mean, massive disappointment, because they just faded so quickly, and I actually ended up warping my standard original E46 ones on a road drive. That's how bad they are. It's too much weight for too little brakes. They don't inspire confidence, they don't feel great, and like I say, for me, it really let the package down. I think that was one of the like second or third things I did to the car, was go with the big K-Sport big brake kit, which again I've done a full video on, all the handling and the brake upgrades, makes a massive difference to the car. But the E92 and E46 for road use, if you're just like the odd carriageway and then you want to end up just taking it easy through the back roads, you're not going to have any issues. But if you like spirited driving or track days, the standard brakes, personally, I don't think are going to cut it unless you're very gentle with them. I'm quite a heavy braker, so for me it never was suited to my driving style, and I say we'll discuss the E92 ones as well. So like the E46 M3, the E92 does not have great brakes as standard. It's got an alley caliper as opposed to a cast, so it's a little bit lighter, potentially a little bit better at cooling. For me, I've upgraded the pads all round to performance friction, braided lines, and I've just got standard discs. Because it's a road car, the performance friction pads on the road are really good. They definitely require a lot more force on the pedal than the K-Sport big brake kit. And as I've mentioned, for those that follow the channel, I will be fitting the brakes from the F80, so the M4, M3, later generation car. You need to put the hubs on, but the rears with just some spacers work perfectly, and that way I'm going to have OEM brake calipers with dust seals. And for those that don't know, dust seals are what's in the pistons on the calipers. K-Sports don't have them, a lot of performance motorcycles don't have them, and they just build up with gunk, so you've got to be on top of maintaining them. It's not a fit even and forget product, whereas with the dust seals in the later calipers like on the F80, it gives me that complete OEM stall, which I'm going to just have peace of mind that I can put a nice set of pads in, put the M4 brakes on as well, should have better feel, better power, and it's not something that requires repeat looking after. You can just get in the car and drive it, which is for me what the E92 is all about. Just the way, and that low down growl is just, oh, it is wicked. It is really cool. And the looks wise, I mean, the E46 on the road now is, like I said, becoming a rare car, and you do get people look at it. I don't know whether that's because I got the CSL bumper on it and people think, oh, that's a really expensive car, but look at the way it just hugs the road. The exterior, obviously we've gone round the cars on the intro. For me, the E46 is timeless. It definitely, for me, is the best car that came out of BMW for the M side of things, especially for the M3. Even now, when I walk up to it, I just think they just got everything so right. The proportions look great, and once I'd fitted the coilovers, it's got the CSL style wheels and the spacing, it just sits so well. I honestly could just sit in the garage and have a beer and just look at it, or the driveway currently, unfortunately, until I get that garage built. But yeah, really impressive how the E46 looks. As I mentioned in the intro, the E92 M3 wasn't a car I looked at straight away and went, that's a car I'm going to look back on and say, what a beautiful bit of kit. It took time for me, and whether that was because I needed to adapt to it, fall in love with it maybe, but also because it was very standard looking when I bought it, whereas my E46 M3 had that full CSL look. So when it was lowered, when I did the spacing, when I turned the wheels back to gloss black, because when I bought it the previous owner had painted them anthracite, I started to think, yeah, do you know what? I really do like the look of this car, and even more so since the KW has kit's gone on, because it just sits absolutely perfectly. And I was out yesterday filming with Matt, he was in this and I was in the E46, and it's the first time I've actually seen the E92 in when someone else is driving it, and I was like, do you know what? That is a really good looking car. I didn't realise how big the bonnet bulge was on the front. It looked so wide and fat on the road. I thought, yeah, do you know what? That is a really cool looking car. Not as good looking as the E46, I'll agree, but a very good looking car now on the road. I think without the splitters, the spoiler and all that, very standard looking motor. So to answer the question, the E92 M3 has moved to the top of the list. And that's not to say I don't like the E46. I love the E46 M3 and I love what I've built with it. And I don't think I could ever bear the thought of getting rid of it. But I just think because you've got that beautiful V8, because you've got the luxury that you can still daily drive it in real comfort with the DCT, with the size, the Harman Kardon, and then at a flick of that MDM button, it can just be an absolute monster to blast around in. It just suits my driving style more these days. I don't live in the countryside. I don't have access to perfect roads every day, which means the E46 for the first hour of trying to get out to these places is not uncomfortable. I've driven to Germany, we drove to Wales in it. It's a good car, especially compared to the Clio, but it just doesn't have that all-round usability. And if I had to go down to one car now and my hand was forced in it, the E46 wouldn't be the one I grabbed the keys for, which I'm sure is a surprise to a lot of you guys that follow the channel, but the E92 has really worked its way into my heart, and I do genuinely think it's a fantastic car, but it does need some tweaks just to get the best out of it. So I hope you guys and girls enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Until next time, thanks for watching.